Well, your question is how did I find out that I was the Duke's grandson? Uh, it all started with my father's funeral. We spent our whole lives up to that point with no idea who our grandfather was. And at the funeral, our grandmother was there, burying her son. The one person who would have to know who our grandfather was, and she wouldn't tell us nothing.
Wow.
So, I have two brothers. We're all three at the funeral. If you can imagine it, at the early and mid 50s, here we are coming face to face again with this question: who's our grandpa? Because we know that it's not the grandpa everybody else had. Dad was born before Granny ever got married. So we were struggling with that after the funeral, and we had a little bit of discussion at my brother's dinner table about it. That it just kind of trailed off. They didn't want to talk about it. And I was driving home from the funeral back to Florida with my wife. My wife looked over at me and said, if you're going to start publishing all those books you've been writing, you might want to look like a cowboy. Well, I had never dressed like a cowboy in my life. But she had a point. I mean, if I'm going to release all these books about the Wild West and the Civil War, I might want to look like a cowboy. So we started shopping for some clothes and started, I didn't even know if I could put a pair of boots on. They looked awful narrow to me for my big feet. But we found boots that fit, and we found hat, and we found everything that we needed, and I just started dressing like a cowboy. And therein, I developed a problem. I couldn't go anywhere without somebody saying something about how much I looked like John Wayne, or, hey, the Duke just walked in the door. I heard all kinds of stuff. It went on for about 3 years. And during that time,
Yeah, keep going then.
anyway, during that time, I started struggling with, is there something to this? I still don't know who my grandpa is. It can't be John Wayne. But the more I looked into things, the more it pointed in that direction. And one day I was coming out of Texas, and I stopped at 3 different stops. I was driving a truck over the road at the time. And each one of my waitresses said something about, who you look like? Or if you had an eye patch, you'd look just like Rooster Cogburn, And I heard this stuff. But the one that really got me, I stopped at the end of the day in Denton, Texas, at a Western wear store up there, and the young lady didn't have a clue who John Wayne was. But she was 19 years old, working in a Western store, and there's a silhouette of John Wayne at the end of the hall. And I didn't know any of that at the time. I'm just looking for a shirt. And she walked up to me to see if she could help me. And she started to say, can I help? And she stopped. Instead of saying, can I help you? She stopped in mid-sentence and said, oh my God, it's you. And I looked at her and I said, you who? What are you talking about? And she pointed to the silhouette of John Wayne from the movie Hondo at the end of the aisle and said, that is you. And I said, oh, darling. He died 30 years ago. But she was adamant about it. And I got back in my truck that evening, and I started having an argument with the man upstairs, the good Lord, because I still don't have any clue who my grandfather is at that point. All I knew is this is getting crazy. And I can't go anywhere without somebody saying something. So I started, I got in the truck and I heard these words. I'm trying to tell you, dummy, you're John Wayne's grandson. I'm looking around for who's talking to me, and there's nobody in my truck. I've always had a relationship with God, but I've never heard an audible like that. And that's the way I say it, an audible. Somebody spoke to me. And the word dummy actually got my attention. If you can imagine that. But I was struggling with it, and for the next 3-4 days, I just had an argument with the Lord. And every objection that I threw up, He wiped it off the table immediately. He said, that's not true because, and then He would tell me, and the cause was there immediately. So every objection I had was just wiped off the table. And at the end of that time, I just threw up my hands and said, "Okay, Lord, if I'm really John Wayne's grandson, I don't even know where to look. I don't know where to begin. I don't have a clue." But you see, I started writing all these books years ago. And I started going out signing books not long after that. And people would come up to my table and tell me things and start telling me pieces of the puzzle I didn't even know. It seems like everybody knew about my father but me and my brothers. And that's when it all started to unravel. My father's mother, my grandmother, was never married to John Wayne. When Dad was born in 1935, they had to cover it up because Michael was born just a few months earlier, and they couldn't have another John Wayne running around. Now, my dad was born with spina bifida. He was born crippled. But they proceeded, the doctor, Dr. John C. Morrison of Hickman, Kentucky, was a 32nd degree Mason. He's the one that delivered my father. I have the proof now. That's all coming out in my autobiography later this fall. He had a good friend named Walter Ruby from Madisonville, Kentucky, which is only around 100 miles or so from where my grandmother lived. And Walter Ruby was the premier Hereford cattle breeder in the country. But you never hear about John Wayne and Walter Ruby. It's always John Wayne and Lewis Johnson. Well, he knew Walter Ruby too. And Walter Ruby was a 32nd degree Mason. But who else was a 32nd degree Mason? John Wayne. And you're going to tell me these men didn't know one another? Didn't have any association with one another? They were pretty good catalysts for making certain that my father's birth was never discovered. And it never was until all these years later. It's been 86, 87 years now. And that's what my autobiography that's coming out this fall deals with. It tells the world who my father was, and they can look at all the evidence for themselves. But it's all kind of come undone over the last 10 years, the entire cover-up. So, excuse me, my hair's just in the truck, and it's kind of chilly out here this morning. But that's what my life story is all about. I had no idea I was John Wayne's grandson. It just all unraveled. The cover-up of 85 years ago just kind of unraveled. And I think the American people, once they see what happened, will understand.